Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. Dillian Whyte and Oscar Rivas have weighed in, and I want to touch on some of the points coming from the weigh-in and a few final thoughts ahead of their fight at the O2 in London, which is, of course, not far away now. So, Dillian Whyte, we'll start with him at the weigh-in, weighing 259 pounds on the scale. That is actually the heaviest he's weighed since 2017. He was 246 pounds for the Derek Chisora fight, so 13 pounds heavier on the scale. So that could tell us a number of things here, that he's put on some more muscle mass, that part of the explanation could be he doesn't think that Rivas is going to be hard to find. We can probably sort of deduce from this weight that he's looking to have as much stank on his punches as possible, and he is going to look to land that knockout blow, and he obviously believes that Rivas will be there to be found, especially with that left hook, which is Whyte's signature punch. I actually thought, looking at Dillian Whyte here, he does actually look in good shape. It's not a sloppy at 259. He doesn't look, overweight or anything like that. But I do wonder, if this fight goes for any length of time, is Dillian Whyte's gas tank going to be an issue? I think we have seen in the past, as a fight can wear on, that Whyte at heavier weights, including against Joseph Parker, where he was a similar weight to this one, I think he was 257 or 258 for that one, he did tire in the second half of the fight and was almost out on his feet against Joseph Parker in that 12th round. He hung on to win, but it does make me wonder if Oscar Rivas can take this into the second half of the fight, if he can withstand whatever Dillian Whyte is throwing at him early on. Maybe he will have more success in the second half if the fight in fact goes this long, because obviously part of Dillian Whyte's strategy, we can deduce from the weight, that he is going to look to land a heavy punch early and often to try and get Oscar Rivas out of there, and more likely than not the knockout punch would probably come from a left hook, that signature left hook. Rivas, meanwhile, he was 239 pounds, and I actually thought, looking at him on the scale, I thought he looked a little less bulky than he did for some of his previous fights, say for example Bryant Jennings, but actually for the Jennings fight he was 234, so sometimes these things can be deceptive, but maybe there's been a change in Rivas's training, and we do know he has actually been training up at altitude ahead of this fight, so it's clear he is looking to enhance his endurance and potentially be able to drag this into the second half of the fight and make sure that he's got a better chance to actually perform in those later rounds, because Rivas sometimes does actually drift off in fights. His gas tank has been a bit of a question, because he's a very big and muscular guy. For a guy of his stature at 6 foot and half an inch, 230 to 240 pounds is quite a bit of mass, and he's almost 240 for this one. But similarly with Dillian Whyte, being at almost 239 pounds, actually a whole stone and a bit less than Dillian Whyte, I think some of his game plan will be predicated on the fact of landing some of his power shots early on, trying to hit and hurt Dillian Whyte, but if it doesn't work, that he is going to have enough in his gas tank to be able to handle whatever Dillian Whyte can throw at him later on. So it wouldn't surprise me if this one does actually go to points, but at the same time, I could see either guy knocking each other out in those early rounds. I think from their weights, what we've seen on the scale, I think it's evident that they are going to look for each other early in the fight. I don't think they'll be reckless about it. I think there will be a feeling out process. They will ease into it. I don't think Dillian Whyte's going to want to charge in and just walk onto something from Rivas, because that could be a good night. But I did like at the weigh-in, you can see here on screen, this is just immediately after the face-off. Oscar Rivas walks away. Dillian Whyte just stares at him intensely for the best part of 15 or 20 seconds. He really looked dialed in. He looked focused. He looks like he's ready for a war here in this fight with Oscar Rivas. So I am looking to this fight. It's one of these fights I find it very hard to predict what's going to happen, because on paper, even though Dillian Whyte is the more experienced pro, he's more battle tested, Oscar Rivas is similarly a very experienced fighter overall when you take in the context of his amateur career. So he has been in situations where he's been pressed, obviously not so much as a pro, but as an amateur he was a top amateur, and Dillian Whyte didn't really have that amateur background. But I think Dillian Whyte goes in this fight the favourite with a lot of fans for good reason, because obviously he's been performing. But as I mentioned in my last video on this just a couple of days ago, I'll link to it at the end of this video, Whyte is a vulnerable fighter. A lot of these top heavyweights are. They have their pluses and minuses and is trying to minimize those weaknesses while executing the things that they are good at. And I think with this fight, with this extra weight as well, I think Whyte will look to impose himself. Some of these roughhouse tactics that he employed against Joseph Parker, he may need to use them again. I mean, within the bounds of the rules of boxing and whatever the referee allows, of course. But Dillian Whyte, this is his big stage. If he can win this, he goes on to be a world champion through the interim title status, and he will obviously be the WBC mandatory challenger. But Oscar Rivas will want to spoil that party. What do you make of this? Dillian Whyte coming in very heavy, 259 pounds, highest since 2017. Oscar Rivas also coming in 5 pounds heavier than his last fight. What do you make of it? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.